Hey there, I'm Joshua Swanson, and welcome back to our creatively titled Social Media Tips blog series. Nope, no one has ever used that title before. We've shot a few video pieces that will give you some specific tips about different social networks and how they can be used to help all those property management and real estate professionals out there who follow our blog. The material I will cover will hopefully be news to you and will get you started on the path to social media success for your community. We do consult and manage brands and residential communities in the social media space, so if you're interested in information about that, you can always email us, follow us, tweet us, check in, comment on our YouTube channel, like us, direct message us, etc. But don't call. No, that's so 2005. Okay, I'm kidding. You can call. In this installment, I cover how to explain to your boss why you're spending so much time on social networks. First, to the importance of writing your story and distributing that story through social media networks. And then we'll move on to showing the influence social media can have on your future residents. So I'm going to take it more from the educational side, try and give you guys some serious tips about how to deal with some of these social networks. But first things first, it all starts with a story. Each property has its own story, right? And future residents can either see themselves playing a part in your story or not. So how do you tell your story well? And how do you find these future residents and communicate with them in ways that they approve of? Well, you got to use social media to do that, because that's where everybody's hanging out now, right? But it's more than that. Story comes first. It's all about content. Content is king when it comes to social media, but you've got to distribute that story through all the different social media channels and have a comprehensive social media strategy. And it's important for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into. Like I said, I'm not going to cover all the social media platforms. I'm going to cover about 4 of them. But let's take it a step back. What happens when your boss walks in? You're in your office and you're on Facebook. What do you say? Well, I'm working. Well, are you really working? You're on Facebook. Well, here are the facts. The facts are this. Google came out with an ebook called ZMOT, or the Zero Moment of Truth, which redefined the moment when consumers decided to make a purchase. In the past, it was the first moment of truth. We would be walking down the aisle, we'd see a product on the shelf, we'd take it off, we'd like its packaging, its price, we'd compare it to what's around it, we'd make our purchase. Now it's the zero moment of truth. It's before we get in our car to go down to the store to make our purchase. We're on our smartphones in Starbucks. We're on our laptops at somebody's house. We're at home reading reviews. This is what ZMOT says. When consumers hear about a product today, their first reaction is, let me search for it online. We've experienced a behavioral shift, right? And the way that we make buying decisions has now changed forever. Here's some staggering statistics that Google came out with. 79% of consumers now say that they use a smartphone to help with shopping. Who's got a smartphone? Admit it. Who's got 2? Who's got 2? There's 2. All right, who doesn't have a smartphone? Point taken. I was going to ask you to leave if you didn't have a smartphone. If there's a hand, I'm going to ignore it. In 2011, the average shopper used 10.7 sources of information before making a purchase. And 70% of Americans now say they look at product reviews before making a purchase. 70% of us are researching products online and using a lot of social media sources for that research before we decide to make a purchase. But how does that correlate, right? Because a residential property is a little bit different from buying a DVD player. Well, what's our moment of action? We go on Facebook, we update our status, and we say, hey, I'm shopping for an apartment, or I'm looking for a DVD player, and people leave comments and reviews, and our friends. And that's how we interact with them. But how do residential communities attract the 70% of Americans who are shopping online, smartphones in hand? If we can answer that question, we can excuse being on Facebook in front of our bosses, right? Well, let's dig deeper. 50 top most visited websites in the US. This is the list, 1 to 50. Starts at the top with Google, goes all the way down to Time Warner Cable, and they own several other websites. Now, these are companies that own other websites, right? But this is the top 50 most visited websites in the US. How many do you think are social networks? Any guesses? 9 of the top 50 most visited websites in the US are social networks. Now, let's take it a step further. How many of these you think integrate with social media? 48 of the top 50 most visited websites in the United States either are social media sites, own social media sites like Google. Google owns YouTube, which is a huge social media site, or they pass leads, pass viewers on to social media sites. So now you have an excuse to be on Facebook at work. So if you use social media to its fullest potential, you'll rent apartments, as we just saw with For Rent's presentation, before possible residents even walk through your doors. So, a quick review of the stats that ZMOT provided for us shows that being on social networks at work means you're hanging out where future residents hang out, and you're interacting with them on platforms that they approve of. That might be important for your community, right? To meet new residents online, to tell your story through social networks, and use your story to attract future residents? It might be worth your time to make sure your community has a presence and an accurate and compelling story to tell to the hundreds of millions of people who hang out on social networks. I talk about story in almost every posting that I write, so get used to it. In our next posting, you'll see how we at Go to My Apartment like to use video to tell stories, and you'll learn how important a presence on YouTube can be for your brand. Feel free to comment or leave questions below, and thanks so much for watching.